The curious thing about suffering is that it always feels so personal, as if the entire cosmos has conspired to poke you particularly right in the ribs. But what if I told you it's all part of the joke? Because suffering, pain, anguish, they all arise from the peculiar belief that things ought to be otherwise. That there is, somewhere, some kind of ideal script, and the present moment, poor thing, has failed to measure up. We cry out, why me? But who, precisely, is this me who suffers? You see, once you begin to inquire, not with a frown, but with a gentle curiosity, you find that the thing you've been running from has no solid center. That the pain may be sharp, but the sufferer is a ghost. Now, I'm not saying pain doesn't hurt. Of course it does, it's meant to. Just like fire is hot. But the trouble begins when we take that pain and wrap it in identity, in resistance, in judgment. And so what we call suffering is often pain plus commentary. And here's the jocance. You see that clearly. The whole thing begins to wobble. It doesn't vanish, no, but it starts to dance. You find yourself perhaps in the middle of tears, laughing. Because the universe, you realize, isn't serious. It's sincere, yes, but not solemn. And suffering, when seen in this light, is not a punishment, but a performance. A divine comedy, where even the tragedy plays its part. Now let's suppose for a moment that you were omnipotent, that you could conjure anything you wanted. Endless joy, constant success, perpetual pleasure. Sounds delightful, doesn't it? But give it a few thousand years of subjective time, you'd be bored stiff. Because, you see, pleasure only has meaning when contrasted with pain. Up requires down, sound requires silence, and pleasure requires something we might call not pleasure. The Taoists knew this. They said yin and yang are not opposites but complements. Black and white swirl together in the eternal dance of contrast. Try and separate them and you ruin the dance. And so pain, that tightness in the chest, that gnawing ache, that deep, ineffable grief, is not an interruption of life. It is part of the pattern. It gives shape to your joys. It is the background against which ecstasy becomes visible. Imagine a piece of music that was only one note, endlessly sustained. That's not music. That's noise. But insert tension, dissonance, the occasional minor chord, and suddenly it becomes interesting. Suddenly it moves you. And so we might say, suffering is not a mistake, but part of the music. The darker tones that make the whole thing beautiful. You don't want a life that is all honey. It would rot you. You want the salt, the bitterness, the depth, because without it you wouldn't feel alive. Now here's a rather funny thing about human beings. We are the only creatures who resist what is happening with our minds. A cat with a thorn in its paw does not curse the heavens or spiral into existential dread. It limps, it heals, it moves on. But we take pain and layer it with narratives. Why is this happening to me? It shouldn't be this way. It's unfair, it's wrong, it's unacceptable. And in doing so, we multiply the suffering. We take what is already difficult and wrap it in chains of thought. Buddhists describe this beautifully. They call it the second arrow. The first arrow is the pain. The second, the one we shoot ourselves with, is our resistance to it. And the irony is, what you resist persists. What you try to push away only grows stronger. It's like trying to smooth out water with an iron. The more you fight it, the more chaos you create. You see, suffering is like a storm. And when you tense up, when you try to fight the rain, you end up soaking wet, cold, and miserable. But when you let it fall, when you stop saying no, the storm still passes, but you are no longer shattered by it. So the question is not, how do I get rid of this pain? The real question is, can I stop resisting it? And then, strangely, like a knot that unravels on its own, the suffering softens. not because it disappeared, but because you stopped trying to conquer it. You began at last to listen. Now, here's something you may have noticed. Suffering has a peculiar way of stripping you down. It takes away your plans, your pride, your pretense, all those carefully assembled notions of who you think you are. It's like fire, not the cozy warming fire of a hearth, no, the cleansing fire, the kind that burns away everything that is not essential. And it's terrifying, because we think we are the things being burned, the roles, the achievements, the control. But perhaps we are not what is burning. Perhaps we are what remains after the burning. You see, in mythology, suffering is always the initiator. The dark wood that Dante must enter, the crucifixion before the resurrection, the caterpillar's complete dissolution before it can fly. Transformation doesn't happen when everything is tidy and pleasant. It happens in the disintegration when the known self begins to crumble and something ancient stirs beneath. The ego, that tricky little fiction, hates this. It wants to stay in charge. But life is not in the business of pleasing the ego. Life is in the business of awakening. And so, when suffering arrives, it may not be the enemy you thought it was. It may be the very force that cracks the shell you've been living inside. A painful grace, if you will, because only through breaking are we made whole. Now here's where it all starts to unravel, or perhaps, finally, come together. When we say, I am suffering, what do we mean? Who is this I? Now we're getting to the real trick of it. Because we assume there's a little person inside a soul, a self, a fixed identity, who owns the pain. But when you look closely, really look, it's rather like chasing your own shadow. The I you think you are is a process, a story, a stream of memories, habits, expectations, a pattern playing out. But there's no solid thing there. No little man behind the eyes pulling levers. This is why the mystics and the sages, the Buddhas, Brahmana Maharshis of the world always return to that same inconvenient question, who am I? Because the moment you truly inquire into that, the foundation of suffering begins to shake. If there is no one suffering, only suffering arising, like wine through the trees, then the whole structure loses its heaviness. The pain may still be present, but the identification begins to dissolve. You stop gripping it so tightly. And that's when the laughter comes, because you realize not intellectually, but in your bones that you've been playing hide and seek with yourself. You've mistaken a ripple in the ocean for a separate self. And so suffering, like everything else, becomes part of the dance. Not because it's pleasant, but because it's empty of the solidity you feared. And from that emptiness, great compassion can arise. For when no one suffers, we all suffer together. And that is strangely liberating. So much of our suffering truly comes not from the pain itself, but from our lack of trust in life. We imagine that if we don't manage it, manipulate it, mend it, it will spiral into chaos. As though the universe were some half-wit child who couldn't be left alone with our feelings. But just look at nature. Look at how a body heals a wound. The cells gather, the tissues stitch themselves, the blood coagulates and retreats. There's no committee, no task force, no 5-step plan. It simply knows. So why wouldn't the soul know how to heal too? We believe we must hurry along our grief, polish our despair, tidy up our heartbreak, but healing isn't a task. It's a rhythm, a tide. You don't rush the moon to fullness. You don't beg the tree to bear fruit before its season. You trust. And trusting means this: let it hurt. Let the tears fall. Let the ache spread out like ink in water. Let yourself be undone for just a moment. Because what we call breaking is often the first sign of deep repair. There's a kind of intelligence in your pain, not logical, but organic. And if you don't interrupt it, it will carry you. Not away from the hurt, but through it. Like a river that doesn't avoid the rocks, it carves around them. So the invitation isn't to fix. It's to feel. Not to rise above, but to fall into. Because in the falling, the healing begins. So then, what happens when you finally stop trying to escape your suffering? When you no longer push it away or dress it up or analyze it to death like some unfortunate frog in a high school biology lab? Well, something rather curious happens. You start to laugh, not out of mockery, not out of triumph, but because, quite suddenly, you see through it. You catch the trick. The veil drops. And you realize the suffering wasn't quite what it pretended to be. It was all part of the show. You see, we spend our lives taking ourselves ever so seriously. We believe our worries, our grief, our heartaches are terribly important. But to the universe, it's all just another wave on the ocean, rising, falling, splashing about. And the suffering only bites when we mistake the wave for the whole sea. Now, I'm not saying it doesn't hurt. Oh, it hurts sometimes dreadfully. But when you stop identifying with the little me at the center of it all, the pain no longer has a fixed address. It comes, it goes, it's weather. And once you see that, truly see it, there's this marvelous release, a deep cosmic chuckle. Because the game was never about winning or avoiding discomfort. It was about seeing through the illusion that you were ever separate or solid or in control. And once that drops, the suffering becomes comical. Not because it vanishes, but because you're no longer fooled by it. As if the universe had been nudging you all along saying, come now, did you really think it was supposed to be safe? So you laugh, because the joke's on you, and you're finally in on it. So then, if suffering isn't a mistake, if it's not some cosmic clerical error, but part of the unfolding, part of the movement of things, then the question isn't, how do I get rid of it? The real question is, can I play with it? Because you see, life is not a problem to be solved. It's a game, a play, a bit of cosmic theater. And the role of suffering, though uncomfortable, even terrifying at times, is part of the drama. Without it, there would be no story, no change, no deepening. And the trouble comes when we take the play too seriously. When we forget we're playing at all. We grip, we resist, we act like the whole thing ought to be different. But suffering, like every character in this great show, is not there to be defeated, it's there to be understood, moved with, played with. Now, I'm not saying you should enjoy it. That's not the point. But can you let it be part of the play? Can you feel it without naming it wrong? Can you allow it without wrapping it in identity? Because once you stop trying to edit the script, something astonishing happens. The fear lightens, the burden softens, and you realize it was all part of the game. And the game is not here to hurt you, it's here to wake you up. So next time it hurts, don't ask, how do I win? Ask instead, can I play with this too? And just maybe, you'll remember that you were never separate from the play, you are the play.